Discover timeless principles for success, growth, and change. Let these powerful words from Dr. Myles Munroe guide you into purpose, vision, and transformation. This is more than a message, it's a journey for your life.
There comes a moment in life when you must confront a painful question. Have you begun to confuse what has happened to you with who you are? That's what cycles do. Over time, they blur the lines between your experiences and your identity. You're not just going through something, you begin to become it. The rejection you faced becomes self-doubt. The delay you endured becomes your definition. The trauma you never talked about becomes the lens through which you see yourself and your future. And slowly, silently, the cycle wraps itself around your identity until you no longer recognize who you were before it all began. But what held you was never meant to define you. Your struggle was not your name. The storm was not your story. The heartbreak was not your whole heart. You are not your mistakes. You are not your disappointments. You are not your missed opportunities, your failures, your lowest moments, or the opinions of those who couldn't see your worth. What held you was a situation, a season, a lesson, but it was never supposed to become a label. The danger is not just in being held captive, it's in adjusting your identity to fit the prison. That's how people stay bound even after the door has been opened. The chains are gone, but their mind is still tethered to what used to be. They've accepted the false identity the cycle gave them: unworthy, unseen, unloved, unsuccessful. They stop believing for more because they've become loyal to a lesser version of themselves. They speak small because they've grown used to survival talk. They walk hesitantly because they've trained their spirit to flinch in advance of another disappointment. But God never defined you by your cycle. He defined you by His word. He called you chosen before you were ever wounded. He called you whole while you were still in pieces. He saw royalty in you when all you saw was rubble. And that's what makes divine identity so powerful. It's not based on how you feel or what you've been through or even how others see you. It's based on how heaven sees you. And heaven doesn't see a victim. It sees a vessel. It sees someone anointed, called, equipped, destined for greatness, even while you're still in the middle of breaking free. The enemy's goal is not just to trap your circumstances, it's to hijack your identity. Because if he can convince you that you are what happened to you, then he can limit your reach, your confidence, your destiny. He'll whisper lies like, "You'll always be like this, nothing will ever change," or "You're not worthy of more." And those lies, repeated often enough, can start to sound like truth. But here's the deeper truth. Anything that contradicts what God says about you is a lie dressed in experience. Just because it happened doesn't mean it's who you are. You are not the cycle. You are the one sent to break it. That's why you felt the pressure you felt. That's why it's been harder for you. That's why it seems like you've had to fight battles others didn't have to face. It's not because you're weak, it's because you carry something strong enough to shift your entire bloodline. Your identity is not in the pain, it's in the purpose that pain was sent to reveal. And once you understand that, the cycle loses its ability to define you. You stop living from your wounds and start living from the Word. You stop introducing yourself by your history and start announcing yourself by your destiny. Every time you agree with heaven's identity for you, you break another layer of the cycle. Every time you declare, "I am more than what I've been through," something spiritual begins to realign. The past tries to cling to you, but it can't find agreement anymore. The enemy tries to tempt you back into small thinking, but your mind has been renewed. The old identity calls your name, but you don't answer. Why? Because once you've seen who you really are in God, you refuse to settle for who the cycle tried to make you. This is why you've been attacked. This is why it felt like the cycle would never end. Because the enemy wasn't just afraid of your freedom, he was terrified of what would happen when you remembered your true identity. Because a free person still trying to discover who they are is one thing, but a person who knows who they are in Christ, that's unstoppable. That's a cycle breaker. That's a history maker. That's who you are. And the cycle was never strong enough to name you. Only God has that power, and He already did. God never operates in cycles. He moves in seasons. While a cycle keeps you trapped in repetition, a season takes you through progression. Cycles spin you in circles. Seasons move you forward. Cycles are the enemy's tool to drain your hope slowly. Seasons are God's method to develop your character, stretch your faith, and lead you into destiny. One feels like being stuck, the other feels like being shaped. And until you recognize the difference, you'll confuse divine timing with spiritual stagnation. The enemy wants you to believe you're in a season, when in reality, you're stuck in a cycle. That's why so many people stay in the same emotional, spiritual, or financial condition year after year, convinced that they're just waiting on God, when in truth, the delay is a pattern, not a process. A cycle will imitate a season. It'll wear the mask of purpose while suffocating your potential. It will tell you you're growing when you're actually just going in circles. It will convince you that you're patient when really you've become passive. God doesn't recycle pain without purpose. He doesn't call you to wander, He calls you to walk. When God brings you into a season, He's not trying to confuse you, He's preparing you. A season is marked by movement. Something shifts, something develops. A new grace arrives for an old problem. The doors may not open all at once, but your spirit knows change is near. In seasons, time becomes a teacher. In cycles, time becomes a thief. Seasons build your faith. Cycles wear it down. Look at the life of Joseph. His journey wasn't a cycle, it was a season with stages. From the pit to Potiphar's house, from the prison to the palace, each moment was a step, not a loop. Even when it felt like he was going backward, he was actually being positioned for greater purpose. Every false accusation, every delay, every betrayal, it wasn't random, it was seasonal. And because Joseph embraced the season instead of resenting it, God used it to fulfill a dream that saved a nation. But if Joseph had misinterpreted the season as a cycle, he might have quit in the prison and forfeited the palace. That's the danger when you don't discern the difference. You start fighting the very thing God is using to prepare you. You resist the pruning. You rush the process. You complain about the waiting and miss the wisdom it's meant to produce. God isn't trying to hurt you. He's refining you. Seasons stretch your capacity. They demand deeper roots. They test your commitment to the vision God gave you. They expose what needs to die and reveal what must live. And the most powerful thing about a God-ordained season is that no season lasts forever. There is an expiration date on your struggle. But cycles, on the other hand, can last a lifetime if unbroken. You can grow older and never grow deeper. You can have years go by and nothing really changes. You're still dealing with the same fear, still stuck in the same toxic relationship patterns, still haunted by the same insecurities, still working a job that drains your soul, but never stepping out in faith. That's not a season, that's a cycle, and God didn't design you for that. He created you to move forward, not in circles, but in divine rhythm. Glory to glory, faith to faith, strength to strength. It's time to evaluate where you are. Are you in a season that's stretching you, or are you in a cycle that's strangling you? Seasons may involve waiting, but they produce transformation. Cycles just repeat what you refuse to confront. Seasons will require surrender. Cycles will demand your silence. Seasons invite God's hand to shape you. Cycles invite the enemy's grip to hold you. One leads to purpose, the other leads to exhaustion. But the power to break free lies within your awareness. You must begin to ask yourself, is what I'm facing helping me grow or just keeping me busy? That's the real test. A cycle consumes time but produces nothing. A season consumes you for a moment but births something eternal. And when you finally realize that God doesn't do cycles, your perspective shifts. You begin to see delays as development. You stop panicking over the pace of your life and start trusting the process of your life. You understand that just because you're not where you want to be doesn't mean you're not on the way. So you stop spinning, you stop repeating, you stop tolerating things that have no fruit. You stop calling cycles God's will when they're really the result of fear, comfort, or compromise. And you step fully into the season God has for you. A season that is not random, not wasted, not pointless, but divinely appointed to bring you into the fullness of what He's promised you. because the God you serve is too intentional to leave you circling forever. When He speaks seasons into your life, He speaks movement, growth, and breakthrough. And when you walk in His timing, you don't just move forward, you move in purpose. Deliverance doesn't begin with your surroundings, it begins in your mind. Long before you step into a new life, you must first adopt a new way of thinking. It's possible to leave the place of bondage physically and still remain chained mentally. That's why so many people find themselves out of the storm but still living as though it's raining. Their body moved, but their mind never caught up. Their environment changed, but their inner dialogue still echoes with the fears and lies of the past. They left Egypt, but Egypt never left them. Real transformation starts with the renewing of the mind, because the mind is the battlefield. It's the space where destiny is either birthed or buried. You can attend every church service, listen to every sermon, declare every affirmation, but if your thinking doesn't shift, your life will stay stuck in a loop. Your thoughts are the architects of your future. They build the walls that either protect your purpose or imprison your potential. And until you confront the false narratives playing in your head, you'll unknowingly sabotage every breakthrough God sends your way. This is why Scripture doesn't just say, be transformed. It says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. God knew the key wasn't just a miracle, it was a mindset. Because the moment your mind changes, your decisions change. And when your decisions change, your direction changes. Deliverance is not just about walking away from what held you. It's about walking toward what God has prepared for you with a clear and focused heart. You can't carry an old mindset into a new season and expect different results. What kept you bound before will keep you from sustaining your freedom now if you don't renew how you think. Some people wonder why cycles keep repeating even though they've cried, prayed, and fasted. The issue isn't always the spirit, it's often the system of thought. You've been saved, but your thinking still needs to be sanctified. You're trying to live a new life with old programming. You want purpose, but your mind still flirts with patterns of fear, self-doubt, comparison, shame, and unworthiness. And the longer those thoughts go unchallenged, the more they grow roots. They become internal strongholds, fortresses of false belief that resist the truth of who you really are in Christ. But here's what makes renewing the mind powerful. It's not a one-time shift, it's a daily discipline. It's waking up each morning and choosing to agree with God over your feelings. It's confronting your inner critic with the promises of heaven. It's challenging the voices that say, you'll never be enough, with the truth that you are fearfully and wonderfully made. It's saying, I refuse to think like a captive because I've been called to live like a conqueror. The thoughts you allow to dominate your mind will either fuel your future or repeat your past. Think about the Israelites again. God delivered them from slavery with signs, wonders, and miracles. He split seas and swallowed enemies, but they wandered for 40 years in the wilderness, not because God couldn't take them into the promised land, but because they couldn't think like free people. They kept murmuring, doubting, and looking back. Their minds were still conditioned for bondage, even though God had destined them for abundance. That's the danger of an unchanged mind. It will always make you crave what God already called you out of. And until your mind catches the revelation, your feet will never walk fully into the blessing. Renewing your mind requires intentional work. You must uproot the lies and replace them with truth. You must learn to take every thought captive and make it obedient to Christ. You must meditate not on fear or regret, but on the word that breathes life. You must guard your mind the way you guard your home, carefully, prayerfully, and consistently, because the wrong thought left unchecked is like an open door to sabotage. But the right thought, rooted in truth, can unlock a freedom you never imagined possible. This is where real deliverance happens, not in an emotional moment, but in a sustained mental shift. When you begin to think like someone who is already free, when you start making decisions based on faith, not fear, when you stop replaying the old tapes of failure and start declaring God's vision over your life, when you allow the Holy Spirit to rewire the inner landscape of your belief system, that's when the cycle truly breaks. That's when transformation becomes tangible. That's when you move from barely surviving to boldly thriving. You are not a prisoner of your past. You are a steward of your thoughts, and the greatest prison you'll ever escape is the one built inside your mind. But the good news is this: the keys to that prison have already been placed in your hands. Through truth, through faith, through the power of God's word, you are fully equipped to renew your mind and walk in the kind of freedom that no enemy can reverse. It's not just deliverance, it's a new design of thinking, crafted by heaven and lived out daily in power. When God begins to break you out of a cycle, the first signs of freedom are often internal, not external. He doesn't start by changing your environment. He begins by unsettling your comfort in what used to feel normal. What once felt familiar now feels frustrating. What once gave you security now stirs restlessness. This divine discomfort is not punishment, it's preparation. God disrupts the false peace of captivity to awaken your spirit to the possibility of more. It's the quiet signal that your spirit is shifting, that your destiny is calling, and that your old reality no longer fits the size of what He has placed within you. Cycles are sustained by comfort. The longer you remain in them, the more they feel like home, even if they hurt you. The human soul adapts quickly, and when you've been in something long enough, you begin to call it normal. You normalize dysfunction. You settle for toxic patterns. You stop questioning what you were never meant to tolerate. You start building a life around what was supposed to be temporary. But God, in His mercy, doesn't let you stay comfortable in what's beneath your calling. He will agitate your peace, stir your dissatisfaction, and let the very thing you clung to begin to lose its grip, not to harm you, but to push you toward healing. You'll start to feel it first in your conversations. You'll no longer enjoy the same small talk. Gossip won't satisfy you anymore. Superficial thinking begins to irritate your spirit. You'll hunger for deeper dialogue, for truth, for purpose. The very circles that once felt like safety begin to feel suffocating. And it's not because they changed, it's because you're changing. You are outgrowing the environments that once echoed your brokenness, because God is stretching you toward the spaces that will reflect your wholeness. Your language begins to shift from survival to strategy, from complaining to creating, from pity to power. Then your desires change. The cravings of the old cycle begin to fade. The things that once triggered you now seem powerless. The people who once held influence over your emotions no longer sway your identity. You stop seeking validation from voices that never saw your value. You stop auditioning for rooms that God never assigned to you. This is the subtle but powerful evidence that your spirit is aligning with God's direction. You're no longer moved by everything because your inner compass is now tuned to divine truth. You are beginning to walk by faith, not feelings. And as your awareness grows, so does your discernment. You begin to see what you couldn't see before. The patterns become clearer. You notice how you always shrink around certain people. You realize how you self-sabotage right before breakthroughs. You see how fear disguises itself as logic, how procrastination masks itself as preparation. And instead of excusing it, you start confronting it. Because when God is breaking you out of a cycle, He opens your eyes before He opens the door. He wants you to recognize the exit, not just escape in desperation. He wants you to see clearly what you're being delivered from, so you don't run back to it when life gets hard. And here's what makes it even more divine. This awakening happens quietly. People around you might not notice anything yet. Your circumstances may not have shifted. Your bank account may still look the same. Your surroundings may still echo the past. But something in you has changed. You're no longer okay with staying stuck. You're no longer interested in going in circles. You feel the tension of transformation. You feel the pull of purpose. And that feeling is evidence that the cycle is breaking, not just around you, but in you. This divine awakening is not emotional hype. It's a sacred whisper from God telling you, I have more for you. And when your soul finally believes it, everything else starts to shift. You stop asking for permission to be free. You stop negotiating with the past. You stop explaining your process to people who were never meant to understand it. You begin to move, even if it's quietly. You begin to detach even if it hurts. You begin to obey even when the instructions don't make sense. Because you've realized something powerful. Staying in the cycle costs more than breaking out ever will. And once that internal decision is made, you carry a different kind of strength. It's not loud, it doesn't need to announce itself, but it is rooted, it is settled, it is unshakable. Because you know now, freedom didn't start the moment you got out. It started the moment you stopped agreeing with what was holding you. It started the moment you awakened to the truth that cycles don't end when the situation changes. They end when you do, when your mindset matures, when your spirit responds, when your heart says yes to God, even if your feet are still in the same place. So if you feel the stirring, the restlessness, the divine dissatisfaction, don't resist it. That's not confusion, that's awakening. That's your soul getting ready for a new dimension. That's heaven announcing that the cycle that tried to keep you captive is losing its grip. That God is not just moving around you, He's moving in you. And once that happens, no chain can hold you, no lie can stop you, no cycle can survive the fire of your spiritual awakening. Because you are no longer in agreement with what tried to define you. You are now aligned with the one who designed you. Cycles are not just patterns of behavior. They are often held together by agreements you've unknowingly made with fear. Somewhere along the way, you believed a lie. You believed you weren't good enough, that you weren't capable, that nothing would ever change, that your past disqualified you, that your voice didn't matter. And that belief quietly set up residence in your soul. It shaped how you prayed, how you moved, how you loved, how you showed up or didn't. It dictated your expectations and minimized your dreams. And so the cycle wasn't just a habit, it became an identity. This is the subtle but destructive power of fear-based agreement. Fear is not just a feeling, it's a force. It's a voice that speaks just loud enough to keep you second-guessing yourself. It sounds reasonable, it sounds protective, but in reality, it is restrictive. It tells you, stay here, it's safer. It says, don't try again, you saw what happened last time. It whispers, you're too broken, too late, too ordinary. And once you agree with that voice, your potential becomes imprisoned, not by external opposition, but by internal permission. You gave fear the final vote, and as long as fear is the authority in your life, the cycle remains your ceiling. But the truth is, fear doesn't need to shout to keep you in place. It only needs you to agree with it once. That one moment of surrender where you said, maybe this is all I'll ever be, or maybe God's promises are for others, not me, was enough for the cycle to take root. It didn't need chains or prisons. It just needed your permission. That is why cycles are so hard to break. Not because the enemy is stronger, but because your agreement gave him access. The enemy cannot control you, but he will absolutely influence whatever area you allow fear to govern. God is not just breaking you out of cycles, He's breaking your agreement with fear. He's confronting every false narrative that you've made peace with, every place where you've settled for less because the risk felt too high. Every relationship you kept because the idea of being alone scared you more than being dishonored. Every dream you buried because failure felt too painful to risk again. Every step you didn't take because someone once told you that's not for people like you. God is shining a light on all of it, not to shame you but to set you free, because your breakthrough begins where your agreement ends. And here's what's powerful. Fear loses its power the moment you stop agreeing with it. The cycle begins to fall apart the moment you say no more. You don't even need to be fully confident yet. You just need to stop co-signing fear's lies. Start saying, I may not feel ready, but I am called. I may not have all the answers, but I have God's promise. I may have failed before, but I am not a failure. These are not just words, they are declarations of war against the spirit of fear. And when you begin to speak truth, heaven backs you. Fear can't hold territory where faith is taking root. Breaking the agreement doesn't mean you stop feeling fear. It means you stop obeying it. You stop adjusting your life to avoid discomfort. You stop waiting for perfect conditions to move forward. You stop shrinking to fit into people's limited definitions of who you should be. You stop replaying past pain as prophecy for your future. Fear thrives in silence and secrecy, but when you bring it into the light, when you name it, confront it, and reject it, it begins to unravel. And with every broken agreement, a new level of freedom is born. God is not calling you to be fearless. He's calling you to be faithful, because faith is not the absence of fear. It's the decision to trust God more than you trust your doubts. It's the inner resolve to obey God's voice even when fear is screaming. And the more you walk in faith, the more you realize that fear was only ever a shadow. It looked real. It sounded convincing, but it had no substance, just suggestion. And suggestion only becomes strong when you agree with it. That's why your power is in your agreement. Heaven will agree with whatever you agree with, faith or fear. So now is the moment. It's not dramatic, it may not be loud, but it's sacred. The moment when you quietly but firmly say, I cancel the agreement. I cancel the agreement with fear, with shame, with smallness, with lack, with regret, with unworthiness. I refuse to allow fear to be the architect of my decisions. I break the contract I signed in silence. I renounce every partnership with insecurity. I undo every word I ever spoke over myself in doubt. I erase every label that didn't come from God. I will not live in cycles formed by fear when I was created to walk in cycles of grace. This is what liberation looks like, raw, deliberate, and deeply spiritual. It's not just about walking out of a situation. It's about walking out of an agreement that gave fear the keys to your future. God is handing those keys back to you. He's giving you the authority to rise, to speak, to move, to become. And once you break that agreement, you step into a new covenant, not with fear, but with faith. A covenant that opens doors, shifts atmospheres, and rewrites your story. Because the cycle ends the moment you stop believing that fear gets the final word. It never did. God always has. When God begins to break you out of a cycle, He doesn't always remove the people around you first. He transforms your perception of yourself. Because one of the most powerful weapons the enemy ever used to keep people bound wasn't physical chains, it was distorted identity. If you believe you are broken, you'll act broken. If you believe you're not worthy, you'll sabotage love. If you believe you're average, you'll ignore divine opportunities. Your life will always follow the direction of your dominant identity. That's why the real prison is not around you, it's within you. The greatest captivity is not in the situation, but in the self-image. Cycles persist, not just because of what happened to you, but because of what you believed about yourself after it happened. Painful experiences write silent scripts in the soul. Rejection whispers, you're unlovable. Failure echoes, you're not good enough. Abuse falsely imprints, you deserved it. Repetition becomes reinforcement. And over time, you don't just experience the cycle, you become the cycle. You lose sight of the original blueprint God placed in you before time began. You forget that before the world gave you a name, heaven gave you an identity. Not broken, not lost, not insignificant, but chosen, royal, redeemed. So when God steps into your story to break the cycle, one of the first things He does is call you by your true name. Like He did with Gideon hiding in fear, He calls him mighty warrior. Like He did with Peter, shifting him from unstable Simon to rock-solid Peter. Like He did with Jacob, transforming him from a deceiver to a prince. God does not address you by your dysfunction. He speaks to your destiny. And when God begins to speak to your true identity, the false identities that held you begin to lose their grip. You can't stay in the same cycle when you no longer agree with the version of yourself that was trapped in it. This is not about motivational self-talk. It's about divine revelation. It's about remembering who you were before the wounds, before the labels, before the trauma, before the fear. It's about seeing yourself through the lens of your Creator, not your critic. When you realize your worth is rooted in your origin, not your outcomes, you stop letting failure define your future. You stop letting opinions limit your obedience. You stop letting shame be your shadow. Because once you know who you really are, you walk differently. You talk differently. You expect differently. You start making choices from wholeness, not hurt. This shift in identity doesn't mean the cycle stops immediately, but it means it can no longer control you, because the version of you that agreed with that cycle is gone. The version of you that stayed silent, settled, and small no longer has the microphone. God didn't just rescue you from the pit, He resurrected the true you, the you that believes again, the you that dares to hope again, the you that no longer finds comfort in chaos, the you that refuses to stay stuck, not because the pain wasn't real, but because the promise is greater, because destiny demands a new identity. You are not what happened to you. You are not what people said about you. You are not your worst decision. You are not the cycle you grew up in. You are not the dysfunction you were raised around. You are not the statistic. You are not the failure. You are not the fear. You are not the addiction. You are not the abandonment. You are not the label. You are who God says you are. And He says you are fearfully and wonderfully made, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, His workmanship, created for good works that were prepared for you in advance. That is your truth. That is your identity. When your identity is restored, your alignment changes. You stop walking toward what you were trying to fix, and you start walking toward what you were created to fulfill. You stop trying to earn love and start receiving it. You stop tolerating dysfunction and start choosing destiny. You stop hiding and start shining, because once you know who you are, you no longer shrink to fit who you were. You stop rehearsing your old story and start living your new one. The past becomes a place of reference, not residence. The cycle becomes your testimony, not your trap. God doesn't just pull you out, He pulls the false you out of the real you. And in that moment of awakening, the cycle loses its authority. Not because the situation changed, but because you changed. Because the child of God within you rose up and silenced the lies that kept you bound. And now the same places that once held you hostage become the very stages where your freedom is revealed. Because when you know who you are, the chains can fall, the patterns can break, and the cycle can no longer survive. Your identity has shifted, and so has your atmosphere. Cycles often survive in the shadows, spaces where silence is louder than healing, where pretending replaces confronting, and where the past remains untouched because no one dares to disturb it. But when God begins to break you out of a cycle, one of the most radical shifts He brings is the courage to confront what you've avoided for years. It's not the kind of confrontation that's fueled by anger or bitterness, but the sacred kind, the kind born of truth, clarity, and divine timing. Because until you confront it, you can't conquer it, and what you refuse to face will continue to define your future without your permission. There are moments in life when God will not allow you to remain numb. The old strategy of burying emotions no longer works. The old trick of distracting yourself with noise, activity, or busyness loses its power. Suddenly, what you've been suppressing begins to surface, not to torment you, but to free you. The buried grief, the silent trauma, the hidden shame, it all begins to rise. You may not have chosen the timing, but heaven did, because cycles cannot be broken while secrets still breathe in the background. God brings them to light, not to shame you, but to deliver you from the emotional agreements that silently kept the pattern alive. You'll feel it in quiet moments. Memories you thought you'd forgotten rise again, not to haunt you, but to invite healing. Conversations that went unresolved echo in your heart. Things you never talked about begin to stir. It may feel like a flood, like an emotional storm, but in reality it's divine exposure. God is shining light into places that have been neglected for too long. He's gently confronting the root of the pattern, not just the fruit. Because if the cycle is to end, the wound must be addressed, not avoided. True healing doesn't come from pretending it never happened. It comes from facing it with Him. This is the moment where emotional maturity meets spiritual growth. You stop blaming others for the cycle and you start looking inward with honesty. You recognize your own patterns, how you use silence to protect yourself from vulnerability, how you lash out when you feel misunderstood, how you run when it feels too hard to stay, how you chase approval to avoid feeling unseen. These behaviors aren't random. They're the echoes of unresolved pain, but now you're no longer afraid to see them. Because you understand, anything brought into the light can no longer hold you in the dark. God is a God of truth, and He cannot bless who you pretend to be. So He invites you into raw authenticity, into moments of weeping, into spaces of reflection, into seasons of release. He may lead you to write the letter you never sent, to forgive the person who never apologized, to stop rehearsing the offense and start releasing it. Not because they deserve it, but because you do. You deserve freedom. You deserve peace. You deserve to stop bleeding internally while smiling externally. And that begins with courage, the courage to confront what's been quietly controlling you from the inside out. Sometimes the confrontation is with people. Sometimes it's with past events. But most often, it's with yourself, with the version of you that adapted to survive, the version that played small to be accepted, the version that wore masks to keep the peace, the version that was strong for everyone else but never had space to be weak. And now God says, it's time. It's time to face her, to face him, to honor that version, thank it for helping you survive, and then release it, because now you're learning how to live. Healing isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a whisper, a prayer, a journal entry, a counseling session, a long walk, a deep breath, a surrendered heart. But every small confrontation with truth becomes a major step toward your freedom. And every tear shed becomes a seed of restoration. God collects those tears. He doesn't waste your pain. And when you bring your wounds to Him instead of hiding them, He doesn't judge you. He heals you. And He does it in layers, in seasons, in divine precision, because He knows what to reveal and when. He knows what your heart can handle and how your story needs to unfold. In the end, what was once your prison becomes your platform. What once silenced you now fuels your voice. What once shamed you becomes your source of strength, because you didn't just break the cycle, you faced it. You met it head on with God beside you, grace within you, and truth before you. You allowed yourself to feel, to release, to forgive, to grieve, and to grow. And in doing so, you've dismantled the very structure that tried to keep you bound. The enemy thrives in denial, but God rules in truth. And when you begin to walk in that truth, unafraid of your story, unashamed of your scars, and unbothered by opinions, you step into a version of yourself that cycles can no longer recognize. You become too healed to be triggered, too grounded to be manipulated, too focused to be distracted. And that level of inner wholeness cannot be faked. It radiates from the soul. It sets the tone of rooms. It reshapes conversations. It shifts generations, because you didn't just survive what happened. You faced it, healed from it, and rose above it. And now you are living proof that truth, when confronted with faith, is the beginning of unstoppable freedom. Sometimes the most powerful move God makes in your life is not through a miracle that parts the sea, but through a quiet internal shift that repositions your heart. He begins to turn your pain into perspective. He takes what once broke you and uses it as the very lens through which you see your purpose. What once made you feel like a victim becomes the very story that empowers others. The years that seemed wasted become the groundwork for wisdom. The disappointments that nearly crushed you become the foundation of discernment. The trials you thought were meant to end you become the training ground that prepared you. God does not waste pain. He transforms it. He doesn't erase your story. He rewrites the meaning of it. Pain by itself is not purpose, but pain submitted to God becomes a portal into purpose. That heartbreak, that betrayal, that loss, it didn't come from Him, but He will use it. When God breaks the cycle in your life, one of the most divine shifts He orchestrates is when He redeems the very things the enemy used to destroy you. The ashes become beauty. The weeping becomes joy. The scars become signs, not of damage, but of deliverance. People may still see your wounds, but they won't see defeat. They'll see survival, strength, and sanctification. You no longer carry your pain as a burden. You carry it as a banner of victory. It takes divine maturity to look at what once shattered you and say, even that had purpose. That doesn't mean you enjoyed the experience, nor does it excuse what happened, but it means you now understand that even the valley had a voice in shaping the version of you that's walking in the light today. There is wisdom you carry now that books couldn't teach you. There is compassion in your voice that only comes from having walked through storms. There is authority in your prayer that came from being pressed in fire. And when you speak now, chains break, not because you're perfect, but because you're proof. You're proof that purpose still rises from pain surrendered to God. Your tears became intercession. Your silence became strength. Your crushing became your calling. That cycle the enemy used to keep you in shame, in secrecy, in defeat, God is using it now to elevate you, to open doors you never thought you'd walk through, to give you influence in rooms where you once felt invisible. Not because you're trying to prove anything, but because your healed wounds speak louder than your words. You walk into spaces now, not just with experience, but with oil. The oil that comes from being pressed but not destroyed, from being broken but not abandoned, from being tested but still standing. God is turning your memory into ministry. The things you once couldn't talk about without breaking down are now things you share with power and grace. The very situations that made you feel unqualified have become your spiritual credentials. You have lived through things others are still praying to survive. And because of that, your presence brings comfort, your wisdom brings direction, your story brings healing. You didn't just come through the cycle, you brought back keys to unlock others, keys to guide the next person out, keys that came with tears but now carry power. This is what divine reversal looks like. God doesn't just rescue you, He gives you revelation. He shows you why it happened. He shows you how He'll use it, and He anoints you to go back and pull others out of the same pit. You become the lifeline you once needed. You become the hope in someone else's valley. And it's not because you figured it all out, it's because you surrendered it all. You allowed God to take your brokenness and breathe destiny into it. Now your life is a mosaic of miracles, pieces that were shattered, now placed by the hand of the Master into something stunningly whole. God never intended for your pain to define you. He intended for it to refine you. He is the God who weaves purpose into every thread of your existence. The moments you thought were forgotten were recorded in heaven. The nights you cried yourself to sleep are the very nights He whispered promises over you, and now you are living in the unfolding of those promises. That's why you can look back and no longer feel bitterness, only gratitude. Because what was meant for evil, God turned for good. What almost buried you has become the very platform where your voice rises with clarity, conviction, and compassion. You don't walk the same anymore. You don't think the same. You don't fear the same. Why? Because purpose now leads where pain once lived. God has shifted the seat of power in your life. Pain no longer sits on the throne. Your calling does. And everything you've been through has prepared you to carry it. The cycle didn't break you. It birthed something in you that is bigger than the pain itself. And now, that purpose is undeniable. It speaks in how you move, how you forgive, how you lead, and how you love.
We appreciate you joining us today. May the wisdom you've heard shape your vision, strengthen your faith, and lead you toward lasting success.